Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right. Hello. Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader, and joining me on this rainy, it seems like, Sean, it's been months and months and months of rain. I have my shades open behind me so people that don't believe us, people that don't live in Pennsylvania can see. It's just never stops raining.
We never see the sun.
No, I feel like we're living. What was that planet in Star Wars where it just rained all the time? That Camino, right? We're living in Camino. So anyway, Sean Kane is my co-host.
How you doing, buddy? We got a great guest today.
Yes. Yeah.
This was a fascinating interview, Bill, and it's researcher James Day. A lot of people might not be familiar with his work. He's up and coming, but I think we found the real, diamond in the rough, Billy. I think this guy is he's a really good researcher, and boy, he dropped some bombs, Bill. We talk about, in this episode, we talk a lot about the Ku Klux Klan. And listen, I said before, Bill, that the Klan, the mafia, they couldn't pull this off without powerful elements within the intelligence community, the government. But that doesn't mean that the mechanical level didn't involve people in the Klan, because we know, members of the Dallas Police Department were in the Klan. We talked to Joe McBride about that. And we also talk about, the reasons Kennedy was taken out. A lot was his foreign policy, but I also think civil rights was a big issue. And I also think that the fact that Kennedy was Catholic, and people don't realize the hatred the Klan had for Catholics. Right. I think the Klan definitely, had a motive, but again, from our perspective, it's always the intelligence community and then their assets. But I think James found some really interesting stuff. I mean, he drops a bombs, Bill, on David Ferrie, on Souètre, who always been strong suspects to us that have been used mechanically in the operation. And just, the amount of information, Bill, that we gave in this episode. And then he goes, more out into, the Klan and the religious right wing and all this stuff here, so this was a fascinating interview, Billy.
Really was. Yeah. Very, very interesting. He's very, very knowledgeable. He's done a tremendous amount of research. He's written a bunch of books. I think he's even done. He did a documentary, I believe, on David Ferrie.
I think he's on YouTube, Bill. I think you can get on YouTube.
Yeah. So he just, like I said, just very, very intelligent, very, very knowledgeable. So I hope you enjoy it. We certainly did. We enjoyed interviewing him. And anything else, Sean?
No, I mean, I hope people listen, and I hope James becomes one of the main researchers in the community, because I think he's an up and coming researcher, and he's doing fantastic work. And this was a fascinating interview, Bill.
All right, absolutely. All right, check out our Patreon. We do a weekly episode called Speakeasy on our Patreon. So make sure you go on there, check out That's Enough Out of You.
We put a lot of intel up there, Bill. We're putting about 3-4 articles a day up there.
Yep.
15 articles, Bill.
All right. Without further ado, here is our interview with James Day. All right. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Billy Raids. What's up, buddy?
We got a great guest, James Day. Welcome to That's Enough Out of You.
Hello, James.
Honored to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you.
James, if you want to just before we get into everything, because I want to really get into the religious right here, and we get into the Klan, we'll get into everything. But just if you could just give a quick bio of yourself before we get started.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, so that's David Ferrie territory.
It is.
Believe it or not, maybe we'll get into it, but yeah, I found that I went to the same high school as Ferrie. I went to the same undergrad as Ferrie, so I know the milieu. But that's Ferrie. So I lived in Ohio for about the first 20 years of my life. I went to school at Loyola Marymount down in Los Angeles. I'm in Southern California now. I work in television, media, publishing. I've done 5 nonfiction books, mostly kind of religious bent, and publishing ongoing research related to the Kennedy assassination that it seems to one door, of course, leads to another, but it all seems to be connected to a certain theme of sort of right wing fascist leaning individuals. So happy to talk more about that. But yeah, I'm married. I got 2 kids, and just really want to kind of leave them a legacy of just at least they can say, Dad tried to show us the way, because so much of what we've been taught has just I question even the reality of what we've
Yeah,
been
I
taught.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree. It's a false history. So where do you want to start, James? You want to start with the Ku Klux Klan? You want to start with the Abundant Life Temple, or you want to start with these? Because I really want to get into these characters, the Reverends Theodore Jackson and Roy Davis. They're fascinating. So wherever you want to start,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
we'll
Well,
get
Jackman. Yeah. He okay, let's start there. I think, less than an hour after the president is shot, Officer J.D. Tippit is assassinated in Oak Cliff,
right.
is murdered in Oak Cliff, ostensibly by Lee Oswald, so the story says. The
Yeah.
location is what intrigued me. Now, it wasn't just me. Garrison picked up on this location in his investigation because he noticed that the church nearby was called the Abundant Life Temple. In his investigation, he was finding these ostensibly clergymen, but they were essentially con artists who fronted as clergy. That's a whole other thing, but it clued him into, I got to look into this church. And his investigation did go a little bit into who were the incorporators of this Abundant Life Temple. He was trying to think of, maybe, according to a witness, there was the potential assailant ran into this church. Was it a safe house of some kind? Was it a hangout? Was it a prearranged location? And this was supposed to be where he was going to go. So all these were going on in his mind. From what I saw, he got as far as trying to find out who those incorporators were. He did find who the incorporators of the Abundant Life Temple were. He found who the preacher was, the pastor basically of this church. He found all of that. It seemed like he was trying to link these individuals to Ruby and to Jack Ruby in some way, from what I read. Now, I did go ahead and sort of pick up where he maybe left off, because it didn't really seem like he got anywhere in that direction. But we know it's an interesting location. I mean, it's odd, right? I mean,
Sure.
the jacket is left by the Texaco station where there's somebody ran down the alley. There was a witness who said it did go into a church. So there's enough there to kind of look into it a little further. So I did. So I actually contacted a son. As you know, all these incorporators are long gone. This is 60 some years ago. It was a
Sure.
travesty. But the son is still alive. He's in his late 70s, of one of the incorporators. I would love to talk to you about the Abundant Life Temple and its preacher, O.B. Graham. He was surprised. I mean, he knew where I was. He didn't know anything about the Garrison thing. He didn't know really anything about Tippit being shot nearby. But he gave me some clues that I'm really grateful for his time. I only spoke to him once on the phone, but he clued me in. He says, my father was a big supporter of that church, uh, until another reverend came into town and really took O.B. Graham, who was the pastor of that church, into a new direction that my father didn't like. And so he kind of broke away from supporting this church. He
Mhm.
gave me the name of this pastor who came into town. And it was another, we're in what we're talking about, we're in the realm of the Pentecostal kind of spirit, the kind of charismatic, the kind of healing that you would see like on TV. They come up, they do the
Yeah.
healing, boom,
Right.
you know, this is
Sure.
that world.
Right.
And so he gave me this other guy's name. O.L. Jaggers is the name, who teamed up with O.B. Graham. Nobody knows this, but you start looking into their affiliations and you're seeing connections to a guy called Roy Davis.
Mm.
This was shocking to me because I recognized the name Roy Davis per Willie Somerset and looking into the radical right as being uh, a suspect in the assassination. So I'll toss it back to you, kind of where, but that's sort of what brought me into looking into that church.
That's fascinating. Let me add one thing, because right now I'm going through the Jim Garrison notes that I got from Paul Abbott and Paul Blow, that they got from somebody else from Fletcher Prouty. And the one thing I did notice, Garrison, of course, the focus was the CIA, but we know the CIA uses the Klan, they use right-wing extremists, religious right-wing, mafia, whoever they use anybody in operations. But the one thing I found in the Garrison notes that I was going through, and we did a Patreon on it, was he had a whole file on secret societies that he was studying, and he was going over, including like the Freemasons, and of course he did work on the Klan as well. But a lot of these religious right-wing groups and a lot of these, these secret societies, he was doing a deep dive, and that included after the Clay Shot trial, because Garrison continued to investigate. He never gave up. He right to the day he died, he was looking into different things. So these notes go beyond just what he had for the investigation. But you mentioned Willie Somerset there, which is fascinating, which leads to the what he said about Joseph Milteer. And I want to talk about Milteer and possible ties with Guy Bannister with Milteer, but talk to me about Somerset and what he said.
Willie Somerset was a Klansman, so there you go. I mean, right away we have that to your point there about the secret society. But he was an informant for the FBI and for the Miami police. Thanks to Willie Somerset, actually. Not that ultimately it mattered, but the trip down in Florida was the motorcade for John F. Kennedy was canceled because of the warning that Somerset passed on, which he recorded the conversation. Most of us know the story of his buddy, Klansman Joseph Milteer, super radical right-wing guy from Georgia, southern Georgia, who predicted basically the cover story of what happened with the assassination, that the president would be shot from a high office.
Somebody be picked up, he said,
with a high-powered rifle and picked up shortly thereafter. Textbook case of what happened to ultimately Oswald. But Somerset only gave one interview, to my knowledge, beyond his work that he did with the informant, with the FBI and the Miami police. And at this interview, near the end of his life, he died in 1970. I think this was in 1967. He said, per Milteer, there were three names that Milteer told him were associated with the hit on the president. Somerset, who saw Milteer the next day, they drove from, I think, Jacksonville to the Carolinas for a Klan meeting. So they had this time to chat, but he didn't want to push, what had just happened in Dallas. And I think we're 99% sure Milteer was there, of course. But anyway, there were three names that Somerset got, and that was involved in the assassination. One was J.D. Tippit. One was Roy E. Davis, another preacher we just mentioned in this Pentecostal tradition. The third name was another reverend, a guy called Ted R. Jackman, or Theodore R. Jackman, who Somerset called one of the toughest killers. And you see pictures of this guy in newspaper, puff pieces on what this guy is doing as a front. Speaking at engagements at churches and that sort of thing. He doesn't look like anything like a toughest killer. It's almost hard to process. But those were the names he were given. And all of it, those three names do point to that Abundant Life Temple as a kind of nexus. That's where Tippit was killed. That's where Davis, the Pentecostal background of Davis. Also, Davis lived in Oak Cliff. Davis, just so you know, was a major Klan figure. Not only that, His P.O. box is traced to the Impeach Earl Warren billboard off Stemmons Freeway. That's Roy E. Davis's.
Wow.
And a gentleman who was raised in a protege of Davis's church. A gentleman was raised in that church. He broke away from it. He writes about it now. He talks about it now. His name is John Collins. He was the one who actually provided us information about Davis backing the printing equipment that was used for the leaflets that were passed around, wanted for treason leaflets that were passed around prior to the president coming. And now we know also the Impeach Earl Warren billboard. Both of those things tie to this guy Davis. So, and then Jackman just continues to give us more information the more I look into him. Now I'm finding that in the 40s, he was a Christian Zionist promoting the Zionist work that was going on for the state of Israel. So suddenly then he becomes a right-wing preacher he's speaking at Young Americans for Freedom. He's speaking on circuits with Edwin Walker. So I don't think Somerset pulled these names out of anywhere, but what's shocking is how little those names are discussed.
Now, wasn't there was a story about there was with JD Tippett with the shooting that they were chasing a suspect. The suspect ran into the Abundant Life Temple, right?
According to one witness, and that's what clued Garrison into thinking there was something going on there. But they didn't really look at it didn't, because it suddenly became, well, maybe it was the library, but and then it was the Texas Theater. So the Abundant Life Temple got off scot-free. What's interesting is that Obie Graham sold that location in 64, I think, so within a year. What's also interesting, and I pretty sure I'm the only one to find this, is that Obie Graham was a chaplain in the Civil Air Patrol. So you have the Civil Air Patrol
with David Ferrie, right, and Lee Oswald.
So yeah, Texas School Book Depository, D.H. Byrd, one of the founders of the Civil Air Patrol.
Yeah.
Then the other shooting, same day, hour later, the building, Civil Air Patrol chaplain.
Right.
At what point do these stop becoming coincidences?
Wow. Now, what's the tie-in with Milteer to a guy we talk a lot on our show, Guy Bannister?
Well, there's probably way more than what I'm going to tell you right now. But my first thing that comes to mind is that after Milteer died, he did not have any children. I don't think he was even married. So when he died, his house was pretty much abandoned. And so, gosh, I think it was because this is 1970. He dies during the HSCA. I think they're still able to access the house and dig around for things. I could be wrong. Maybe it was the church committee, but either way, I mean, it's his files are left untouched. Among these files was a business card for G. Ray Gill Jr. So right then and there, that's just an obvious connection to what's going on in New Orleans at that time.
Right, and there was so much going on in New Orleans with Bannister. We know 544 Camp Street. The one thing I want to say, because I've been investigating this a long time, and to me, like when you try to pull out, characters like Alan Dulles and James Angleton, everything falls apart, because we know Angleton was controlling Oswald's 201 file, and we also know now that from the latest release that Angleton was also in control of Sirhan's files, which is amazing when you think about it, because Angleton's operation side, he's not on the analyst side. He would have no reason to be tinkering with an investigation or anything. So what operation is he running that he's got, two of the most infamous alleged assassins in history that he's controlling their files? But anyway, my point is that, the CIA uses a lot of people. So when I look at the assassination, I always look at it in three phases: the sponsors, kind of the operational management, and then the mechanics, the actual mechanics. And I think a couple of the things that I think is important to understand, the right-wing element that wanted Kennedy dead, because I think he was killed for a lot of reasons. I think his foreign policy was a big reason, but I also think civil rights was a huge reason too, that they wanted him killed. And I think a lot of people downplay that. They try to say Kennedy was slow on civil rights, which I don't agree with at all. And I think a lot of this had to do with, because a lot of these guys that were involved in this plot were so hardcore to the right. I mean, that's the thing. Even guys like Anglican and Dulles, they're all the way to the right. I mean, hardcore. We're talking hardcore. But I do think civil rights had a big play in it. And the other thing is, when we had Joe McBride on our show, he talked to us about a lot of the Dallas PD at that time were members of the Klan. You remember the one guy even brought his card out and showed
him his card. Yeah,
he was proud about it. You know.
Yeah. It was wonderful you mentioned that. I actually didn't know that about Saran, so that's interesting.
It just came out with the latest file release.
Wow. But yet another case, by the way, of someone being handled by a strange reverend. There's a guy, Jerry Owen, who was, the official stories that he gave Saran a ride. You look into it more. Oh, he knows him way more than that, and he was a strange reverend. Also, when James Earl Ray was doing some time in Southern California prior to the April assassination on King, he visits a reverend for some psychotherapy on hypnosis. And when you know hypnosis and you know Ferrie, you know Jack Martin, all that, this guy, Reverend Xavier Von Koss, it just reeks of just phoniness, you know. And that guy disappears. So many people just disappear after the assassinations. They're gone. They're gone.
Yeah.
We will be right back.
Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. You know, we've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, you know, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. You know, so there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. You know, we have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And, you know, we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels to you know, with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, you know, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there? A $3 tier?
$3, a $5, a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give $50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. You know, once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, you know, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you know, you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's, you know, people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of, you know, however you want to do it, however you want to join. And we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely, you know, Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure. But we definitely, you know, appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And, you know, we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up. And it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and you know, making
supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members. And then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, look for our logo, and just fill in the information and you can join. All right. That's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you.
But you said that, though. I don't mean to cut you out. I was just thinking about it. Bill was probably thinking the same thing. We had Dave Whelan on a lot talking about the John Lennon assassination, and so many people were around Chapman that were connected to the religious right wing. These reverends and these extreme right wingers who all had, military intelligence ties. Navy intelligence, CIA ties. So that's that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about that, James.
Yeah. But to touch base on what you were saying about about the right, I do think civil rights was huge, and we can look at. I mean, the problem is Delphine Roberts. Delphine Roberts liked to talk, and she liked to hold up signs, and she liked to make herself known in op-eds and opinion pieces in the newspapers. So we still have those records today. She was so vocal about both brothers.
Yeah, she was hardcore.
Very. And you see her affiliations, and that those affiliations were also going on at 544 camp. They were totally blended at that same point. And per Willie Somerset, I believe it was, he said one of the financial backers of the assassination, you're talking about sponsors, was Leander Perez, Judge Leander Perez from New Orleans, who was also part of the whole Bannister milieu. But what's interesting is that Roberts was excommunicated from the Catholic Church down in New Orleans, as was this Leander Perez, very wealthy guy who was close to Huey Long. But why were they excommunicated? Because they were opposing the archdiocese implementation of the integration of the diocesan schools.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, a giveaway about where their mentality and affiliations were down in New Orleans at that time.
And let's just ask for people who might not remember, Roberts was Bannister's secretary. So she did say a lot and a lot of interesting things. And of course, she's even in Oliver's movie. Oliver put her in the movie JFK. She's in there. So, this is fascinating stuff. It really is. And I think a big, one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about is Kennedy being the first Catholic president. I mean, that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially in the Deep South. I mean, that's why he took Lyndon Johnson, because the conservatives, even in the Democratic Party, they were not going to vote for Kennedy in the South. They just the Democrats. They weren't.
No, I think it's important that we just have to touch on this. This is absolutely integral, if as a link, a bridge to secret societies, to the mentality of the South, to the future of what America was and is, and what a certain kind of Protestantism that had long been established. Officially, it's not a country that has a religious affiliation, but you elect Kennedy. Does that mean then we're going to be getting orders from Rome, from the Vatican?
Yeah, a lot of people felt that way. Yeah, a lot of right wingers felt that way.
Absolutely. And so actually, there's a lot of rhetoric out there, by the way, that exists today, very anti-Catholic propaganda pieces that were published at the time with ties to John Birch Society, folks from the Minutemen, people who, by the way, these churches that we're talking about, these clergy, they're not Catholic clergy. They may not even be official. They may not even be legit at all. They're probably not. But if they are, they tend to be of that kind of Pentecostal, just we're wary of anything coming out of Rome. And so we have to be wary of Jack Kennedy as well.
Yeah, let's, what I want to touch base on, talk to me about the Chickasha Knights, and then, the worldview of, white Christianity superiority. And I want to talk about the Order of St. John too. But another thing before we get to that, was Guy Bannister, what was his tie to the White Citizens Council?
Well, he was a member, and that's very integral, because so was Roy E. Davis in Dallas. So you had the White Citizens Council in New Orleans that were sprouting or spouting anti-Kennedy rhetoric, but you also had that going on in Dallas as well. And it was actually Roy E. Davis, by the way, just to touch on this, to tie in what you were saying earlier. He is known for planting Klansmen into the Dallas PD. So we can trace what you were saying earlier, and we can kind of pinpoint. And by the way, Bannister was a lawman too. That doesn't go away.
FBI background, sure.
You know,
Yeah.
so this whole right wing, even though he was a private investigator, obviously that's a way of he's special agent in charge. Suddenly becomes he did some time in New Orleans PD, and then he's a private investigator. So none of those affiliations just vanish when you take.
They don't vanish. They're connections. You can see why they picked Dallas for this assassination, though. You can see the hardcore, right, anti-civil rights, feeling that were down there in the Dallas at that time.
Someone said to me when they were kind of reading my thing, they asked me a question. They said, "Well, how is it that you have, say, someone like this Jackman where he's on record as being a pro-Zionist, but he's also affiliated with the Klan? So aren't they anti-Jewish, that kind of thing?" But Larry Schmidt, remember Larry Schmidt, who ran, right?
Yeah.
Young Americans for Freedom, and he really got Bernard Weissman to do the Welcome Mr. Kennedy ad. He was a protege of Edwin Walker. He made a great point. I think it was in a letter he wrote to Weissman, trying to get Weissman down to Dallas. He said, Dallas is sort of like the place where we can all sort of unite. So it was, I kind of think of it as like an all-star game where you take guys who normally maybe wouldn't see eye to eye, coming together to play, or a dream team like in the Olympics,
Sure.
to take out their common enemy, which was the president. So it's not too far-fetched after.
No, it's not. And what I found all these years looking into this, when you start looking, you go deep down into the underground, you start picking up these rocks, you find these associations that you would never think. And going back to the CIA, Allen Dulles would deal with anybody except the communists. I mean, he would deal with, Ku Klux Klan, the mafia, the Nazis, apartheid. What's that, Bill?
Yeah, no, I was just saying the Nazis also.
Nazis, of course. I mean, he had no problem dealing with people like that. So,
Sure.
Yeah. All right, you got some, Bill?
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
but you were
talk to us about the Order of St. John. Let's get into that.
Yeah. So those are the Shikshini Knights, who you mentioned, is the Order of St. John. It's another secret society. What are you talking about here? Well, in the Middle Ages, there was the Hospitallers, which were kind of also the Templars were going on at the same time. But today we still have the Hospitallers in the Catholic Church. They are the Orders of Malta. However, we're looking at a world that is like a funhouse where the mirrors are like all tinted and stuff. So there's like a spin on the official Orders of Malta, and that's the Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem, who says we are the official knights from the Middle Ages. We're still in existence. And this particular group, this particular filtered group that we're speaking of here, base their operations in Shikshini, Pennsylvania. Very right-wing, very fascist. But what's really weird is that it managed to recruit a military component. It's Armed Services Committee that they called it in their newsletter, the Maltese Cross. And in this Armed Services group were veterans of General MacArthur's staff in the Pacific in World War II. Among them, General Willoughby, who we know from General Salon, was pointed to as a figure in the assassination of the president.
Yeah.
So in this world, then you can kind of funnel maybe your affiliations, your sympathies, and be part of this membership that had a very militant component to it. So much so that there was we see the vestiges of this group today in I'm thinking of like Montana, where you have like the shootouts of like the holdouts who aren't
Idaho,
that's sort of where I'm thinking of, where they can be very dangerous with their weapons, with their ideology, and once they have a target, it's going to be very hard for them to not go along with their plan. And then when you have generals like Willoughby, Pedro Del Valle, Edwin Walker, although he was not part of MacArthur's staff, he was still brought in as a Chick-Shinny knight. So that's to me a very telling secret society that banded together to take out the president.
We're not too far from Chick-Shinny right here, right, Billy?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. James, I wanted to go back a little bit, and I wanted to ask you a question about David Ferrie and, kind of connecting him. I know obviously he had deep, early in his life, had connections with the Catholic Church, and then, was sort of expelled, I guess, right? Talk about that a little bit and how you think that impacted his views and what, he ended up becoming.
Oh yeah, that's because what's interesting is I can get it. I see the Ferrie trajectory, and then all of a sudden it just takes this detour, and I'm totally lost with where he is. What's interesting is that Ferrie is from the west side of Cleveland. He grew up right in the shadow of Cleveland Hopkins Airport, which is very interesting because when the religious thing didn't work out for him, planes did, and it was his father, who was a police captain, who brought him into the world of flight as a consolation prize, to not being part of the seminary, basically. But you can already see the disturbance, the kind of personality questions that would come out later in New Orleans. We're starting as a young man. The issues with the hair came from alopecia.
Right.
So he struggled. Yeah, he struggled with that. But for the most part, he was very well spoken. He was a debater. He was working in the school newspapers. He was very devoted to the faith. He was going to youth conferences. He was very committed to becoming a priest, and it just didn't work. And it was like his world fell apart. And we can see it really collapsing when he, after he realized I'm probably not going to be a priest, he goes to teach at a local Catholic high school, which is an all-boys Catholic high school.
Right.
And that's where Benedictine is the name of it. He's teaching aeronautics there, but he's kicked out for apparently taking students to a brothel. And he was just irascible. The people who worked with him talk about it later. They said he was just the worst teacher that I'd ever seen. So it's almost as if he wanted to find himself in the South. But real quick, I'll mention two things. I just learned this yesterday. Joseph Milteer spent time in Cleveland in the 30s and 40s. That's interesting.
Ooh, interesting.
Also, Marcello, typically, he did not live in Ohio, but where Marcello came from, a lot of people settled in Cleveland. It's just I'm not saying anything. It's just an
Talk about from Sicily when he came from.
Right. So there's as we know from La Cosa Nostra of Cleveland, there's the Italian mafia component. It's just we don't know exactly what may have influenced Ferrie necessarily. I will say his instructor was a woman who really got him in love with flying. Her name was Jean Natz, but Naatz. But what's fascinating about Natz is that she was in real estate, and she would fly a plane to go to real estate locations in Greater Cleveland, which is very interesting that she would fly a plane to go look at a house and show people houses and stuff. So Ferrie, he just sort of stepped into the plane world and literally took off from there. But it is a mystery, though, how he completely collapsed and became the Ferrie that we know. It's almost as if he was a different person.
Yeah. Yeah. The portrayal
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that, the portrayal of him in the movie JFK by Joe Pesci was, seemed to be spot on. I mean, he just, the psychosis and just all the crazy stuff that, he was going through, and then the illness that he was, suffering from. And, just really an interesting character in all of this. Probably one of the most interesting.
And I just wanted to add, we actually did an episode on the Cleveland Cosa Nostra family. We did the whole
Right. The
war with Danny Green with the car bomb
car
war.
bombs. Yeah.
So we did an episode on that. But yeah, Ferrie's a really interesting character, and that whole Civil Air Patrol connection with Oswald is it's pretty much you can't deny it. There's a picture of him. There's so many witnesses now, and just going through the Garrison notes, there's so much he had on Ferrie and Bannister and Clay Shaw that it didn't really come out at the trial. But he had so many witnesses and so much evidence that people can't. I don't know how anybody could deny today that they knew each other. I mean, it's just ridiculous to say.
Yeah. No, the photograph is the giveaway, and the fact that Ferrie denied that he knew Oswald at all is also it was a bald-faced lie.
Yeah, bald-faced lie, and Garrison knew that. I mean, of course, the whole thing. They let him go. He sent him over, handed him over to the FBI. They let him go, but Ferrie was looking for the library card. That whole story. He was in a panic. Somebody connected him to Oswald and
the hunting trip, right? The
hunt. Well, and Garrison has a lot of interesting notes on that whole trip and how it ties into everything and how he feels it ties into the guy who he thinks gave the order to Ruby, Lawrence Myers, and his notes kind of tie that whole thing out. So there's a lot of stuff we could go deep on. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about, James, is your article on the laundry truck. Let's get into that a little bit, because this is a fascinating story. This is pretty interesting.
Thanks for bringing it up. And I have to say, I didn't come. That was actually brought to me. Gentleman, independent researcher named Paul Cummings from Michigan. Read my radical right articles and thought he was the one who's been really kind of doing the county records and getting deep into this. He was the one that really took off, and he brought me in and kind of cut me loose. But I'll briefly, for those who don't know, once you see it, guys, you can't unsee it. It's, right there in the Alkins. I mean, the motorcade's about to turn left to the fatal turn, at the intersection onto Elm. And there's a white laundry truck just happened to be parked at Elm and Houston. In the far right lane, there is no driver, and it's been overlooked by official investigative bodies into the assassination. Moreover, when the FBI was so interested in trying to find the cleaners of the Oswald jacket that was found outside or nearby the Abundant Life Temple, they were really trying to find where that laundry ticket, you get something back from the cleaners, you leave the tag on. I mean, I worked at a dry cleaner myself. It happens. They contacted 400 cleaners and laundries in Fort Worth and Dallas. It's in the Gremberling report of 1964, the FBI report. And they list all of this. They did not contact that laundry facility. It's called Clean Towel and Linen. Clean Towel and Linen. It's out of Fort Worth. They didn't talk to them at all. It's a little weird, because once you start actually getting into who owned that, it's a bit of a problem because you start to point. I can't believe this. It starts to point to organized crime, to folks who've long been suspected in the assassination, have affiliations with this laundry truck, and Zionism, believe it or not, and every point so far, we've done 3 articles on what we've been finding. I've done the last 2, mostly because of I've really tapped away at Beverly Hills as being a place, because the owner of this laundry facility is a Southern Californian, which is interesting. He had Fort Worth folks basically front the laundry business in Fort Worth, but he was from California. He was in the oil business. The attorney for the Clean Towel was a Beverly Hills lawyer who was the board of director at City National Bank of Beverly Hills. This was owned by Al Hart. Al Hart owned Del Mar Racetrack. Al Hart was the bank that out of which came the Sinatra ransom money. Johnny Roselli had an account at this bank. Not kidding. It's 2 miles from where Jim Braden gave his office as. Remember, Braden, of course, was picked up at Daltex and let go, never fingerprinted. Hang on now. So Jim Braden also, so as we know, oil business. He gave a La Cienega, which is in Beverly Hills, a La Cienega address. I looked it up. There's a book from 1955 that says that was Melvin Belli's Southern California law office when he would come down to visit from San Francisco. So you had Jack Ruby's lawyer in that same building of Braden, who was picked up at Daltex. Moreover, Dave Yaris, who was from Miami,
Right.
mobster.
Yeah, Jewish mobster.
He ran a laundry business called Clean Towel, spelled Klene or Kleen, depending on, there's some differences out there. He actually is on record. His son was also in that world too. There's a phone number that's associated with the Yaris son calling the owner of the Clean Towel business. This was in '66, so this is later, but nonetheless, you can't avoid that. We also know that the attorney who had the Clean Towel was the one I was talking about, City National Bank director. He ran guns for the Haganah prior to the founding of Israel. So he was illegally smuggling weapons. Moreover, the connections in Fort Worth with this place point to figures that we know from Assassination lore. I'll mention two. One was Leon Brockman. You may not recognize the name, but in the commission documents, Marguerite Oswald was his nurse. And she says there was a circumcision party, in the Jewish faith. It's a big thing. There was a circumcision party at this guy's house for his grandson. She is convinced Jack Ruby was one of the 250 in attendance at this party. There was another connection there with this Fort Worth people behind the Clean Towel, and that was Leon Gochman. Leon Gochman hosted Michel Roux, Roux, alias John Souètre, alias Michael Victor Mertz.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
And we talk about Souètre a lot on the show.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just tie in with one last thing about Souètre.
Wow.
There was a Clean Towel employee who rented a house right across from Meacham Airport in Fort Worth. The kind of landlord, or the guy who owned this house that this employee of this laundry truck place rented from, was a guy called Scott Love Dealey. Dealey served under General Willoughby in the Pacific in World War II. And if we look at that Souètre connection, or whoever that was, Fort Worth, the flight out of Fort Worth to Mexico, suddenly this house where the employee stayed of this laundry facility suddenly becomes a very good safe house. And that's all been in the last maybe 6-8 weeks.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You.
that we found.
That's amazing stuff.
Crazy,
That's
crazy.
amazing. The Souètre connection is just amazing because we've
Yep.
been doing a lot on Souètre.
Yeah.
One name though that you mentioned there that I think is important to go back on is Johnny Roselli, because one of the most overlooked documents, and I mentioned this on our Patreon, but one of the most overlooked documents that was released by the CIA was the one that states that Johnny Roselli is the main contact with the CIA and the mafia, and all contacts coming from the CIA has to go through Roselli. Even they mentioned in that same document that Sam Giancana was only brought into the Castro plots to sit there to bring in Santo Trafficante, because the CIA wanted Trafficante because of his ties to Cuba to bring in there to assassinate Castro. And Roselli wasn't a boss; he was a captain, and Giancana's a front boss, but he could bring in a guy like Trafficante. So that document I think is so important, and it's so vital to understand that Giancana's only role in those plots was really to sit down and bring in Trafficante. And Roselli, when you start looking at Roselli, you have to look at Roselli as when I look at it, I always look at him as a CIA contract agent first, and then a mafioso second, because he's so important, because he's the main contact that ties everything. We know he's very close with William Harvey. And originally, the originator that the CIA brought in for those plots is a guy that I'm doing a lot of investigating now. We're going to have an episode on that, and that's Bob Mayhew. And Bob Mayhew is there. There's so much on Mayhew that it's amazing. So once you start turning over all these rocks, it's just amazing what connections you have there. But that was great stuff, James. That Souètre stuff that's powerful stuff, buddy.
Yeah. But thanks. But just to touch, I just want to say about the Roselli thing. It would be a coincidence, but when you're talking about people in situations and incidents who others have talked about and who are known as, in the lore of over the 6 decades, that's when it becomes that's where it becomes almost disturbing, because how much of this has been coded as. And you look at a lot of my research comes from the old newspapers. There's so many of these puff pieces that bank on American naivete, to the point where one last thing. I mean, right down the street from Roselli using the bank of the attorney who's the director, of the City National, and we can go on and on. But Carpet Engineers, that was the company that Bernard Weissman worked for when he came down to supposedly sell carpets, and then his name ends up in the Welcome, Mr. Kennedy, and he's expressing shock, like, I can't believe this, right? Carpet Engineers was right down the street in Beverly Hills, so they had, which is very similar to the clean towel thing, they had offices in Beverly Hills and they had offices in Dallas, and after 1964, like, it's gone. But during the trial of Ruby in February of 64, I'm finding just nationally, they call it like syndicated, like local newspapers picked up this article all over the country. And it's this puff piece about the president, the co-owner of Carpet Engineers. And it's this like glowing article about how he loves to recruit actors as carpet salesmen, because if they could sell it on stage, they could sell it in your living room, And I'm reading that, just knowing what was going on in Dallas, knowing Carpet Engineers was like the front to get Wiseman down there, to get that ad in the paper, that so obsessed Ruby when he read it, supposedly. It just seemed to me like this whole thing about acting and putting a facade on and just assuming that the American public is just going to accept it. I mean, it worked. It has worked. And hopefully we're seeing the cracks to that. But it's just so sad that is how it's just an act. So much of it is just an act.
Yeah, and I think the media played such an important role in that, and just, like a bunch of parrots just saying Oswald did it, and all the nonsense for years and years. And anybody who's really looked at this case for more than 20 minutes, half hour, you understand that there's something more there than Oswald. I mean, that's obvious. But I do want to touch on another name that we kind of crossed over quickly. But Bill, do you have anything before I go on?
Oh, go ahead, Sean.
One of the names that you mentioned earlier, and I think it's important to look at, because a lot of people, when they talk about the oil tie-in to this whole thing, and of course, you know, the whole thing with Kennedy with the oil tax depletion allowance and everything, a lot of people focus on H.L. Hunt, and there's of course a lot of, you know, suspicion with Hunt, especially there was early, but I always looked at Hunt to me as a distraction. And the one guy that I always looked at is with a lot of focus, and I think he deserves more attention, is D.H. Byrd. I mean, D.H. Byrd had Army intelligence connections. He owned the Texas School Book Depository, like you said. He started the Civil Air Patrol, you know, where Ferrie meets Oswald. He also, after the assassination, he would take the window where Oswald, you know, supposedly shot from the 6th floor, and he would have it in his mansion like a shrine. And he was supposedly on this hunting trip this whole time when this whole thing went down. Now, a lot of people look at that window thing as, you know, I've heard people tell me, well, if he was involved in conspiracy, he would know that Oswald, you know, didn't do it. But to me, I look at that like he's like a slap in the face to everybody. You know what I mean? Like he's bragging about, this is what we did. We blame this guy that had nothing to do with it. But even if he didn't, I mean, that's pretty sick to have the window where the guy allegedly shot from, and you put it in your living room of your mansion.
No, I mean, look how many of these guys, D.H. Byrd included, are super wealthy. Like they have really nothing going on but to plot like some kind of assassination, you know? I mean, because they're upset about something, you know, and they think that they're above everything else, and you know they're going to go and do it. I mean, there is 1% after 1% after 1%.
And he's another hardcore right winger, hardcore.
Yeah. So there's two things I think we need to quickly talk about D.H. Byrd. There's so many strange things about it. I mean, his you know, cousin being Admiral Byrd, for instance, and the expedition to Antarctica,
Yeah.
all of that. But is he on the hunting trip at Safarilandia in Africa? Well, he says he was. Funny, he didn't really like going out of the country very much. Never really liked leaving Texas either. But the guy who supposedly ran the Safarilandia, which again conveniently disappears very quickly after the assassination, was a German guy. He came stateside in maybe 1965, and he is sponsored or hosted on his trip to America in I want to say Wichita, somewhere in Kansas, I think, by Koch, the father of David and Charles Koch, you know, the Koch brothers. So the father puts this guy up to stay. Koch was really up with John Birch Society. So essentially, we have the Safarilandia guy where Byrd is basically backed by the John Birch Society when he comes to America for his world tour, whatever he's doing. So there's some strange things there. It's a great alibi, one way or the other. The other thing is, yeah, Byrd did own the Texas School Book Depository building,
right?
Yeah, as early as I want to say 1936. But here's the thing: the actual business of the Texas School Book Depository didn't move into 511 Elm, right, until only just months before. They were leasing the building in 1962.
Right.
So you have a vacant building, you only move in, then you're moving in a few months before that. So you have basically all of 1962, if you're leasing that property, to move in, because you're coming from across the street. You're coming from the Dow Tex building. There's nothing weird about that. But moreover, you decide to do flooring after you've already moved in.
Yeah.
When you've already been leasing it for over almost 2 years.
Right. A lot of doesn't add up. It's he's definitely someone that I think deserves more work on, you know, more investigation into. One thing that I want to circle back to Ferrie, because there's so many avenues we could go down here, but what was with there was a call from Cleveland to the FBI, a contractor about the German Mauser. Could you tell that story?
Man, you have been really looking at my work.
I have been. It's
really appreciate
fascinating, James. Your work is fascinating.
Thank you, thank you. As you know, I mean, the weekend of the assassination, FBI is getting a lot of calls, maybe crack calls, or they put potential leads. Like anything, there's always a lot of tips when a big news story is hitting. This particular story really struck me. So, FBI gets a call from a gentleman on the west side of Cleveland, and he says, "I'd like to report to you." At the time of this call, Oswald's still alive, and the news is saying that the weapon found on the 6th floor was not the Mannlicher Carcano, but a Mauser. Okay.
Yep.
So he calls and he says, "I want to tell you something. I don't know if this has anything. I just want to tell you this. 2 weeks ago, I'm the guy calling the FBI. He's like a contractor or someone who does work at houses. So I went out and saw a client at a house 2 weeks before the assassination on the west side of Cleveland. He was a Cleveland firefighter. And we're talking, and as I'm looking around his house, he wants to show me this Mauser that he has. So he shows him the Mauser, and he tells this guy who calls the FBI, this firefighter tells the guy, "I'm sending it to a guy down in Dallas." The guy didn't think anything of it until the assassination. Dallas, Mauser. What really shook me, though, is two things. The guy who sent that gun down to Dallas was a Cleveland firefighter. That's huge in David Ferrie's world.
Mhm.
His uncle was super high up in Cleveland Fire.
Right.
Unfortunately, he was my grandfather at the same time. He died in 93. So I'll never be able to ask him. My grandfather was a battalion chief at Cleveland Fire at the same time. So undoubtedly he would have known Uncle Ferrie.
Sure.
But so that was interesting to me. I thought Cleveland Fire, I knew Ferrie was close to his family. His father had already died. We know, I believe, when this Winnipeg incident, by the way, unfolded in 64, some have said, well, Ferrie couldn't have been there because that was the funeral of his uncle, the uncle we're talking about who was in
Right.
Cleveland firefighter. Actually, not really, because if you in the Catholic world, you have your funeral in the morning. Ferrie got onto his own plane, flew to, Winnipeg, which is very far from Cleveland. Okay, so anyway, and then I looked at the guy's address, which is great. FBI, I love it. They always give you the address. They give you way more than you need. The address of this firefighter who sent the Mauser to Dallas is a mile from the David Ferrie home in West Park of Cleveland.
Wow.
I contacted the widow of this firefighter without telling her like what I was really doing. I just said, I have family who was in the firefighter at the same time. Where was he stationed? I was trying to figure out if he was stationed at where Uncle Ferrie was. I haven't been able to dig into it too much. She gave me a couple of leads, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Unfortunately, for some reason, the Cleveland Fire has no real solid records going back. But man, there's a lot of questions there.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is great stuff.
Yeah. Amazing.
Uh,
Yeah. And
some?
well, just, in continuing our list of great guests from Cleveland, Matt Crumpton is from Cleveland.
Yeah, he is.
Matt, who has the great podcast Solving JFK and is a co-author on chokeholds. And then I lived in that area I lived in Strongsville for a year and a half, so right around that area. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Matt's high school there were football rivals with Ferrie School, right? Didn't he say that?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. They're a big rival.
This Crumpton probably went to St. Ed's, which is the
Yeah, I think so. Right, Billy?
I can't remember. We'd have to check back with them, but yeah.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So James, we're going on an hour here, but this was great. We'll have to have you back if you want to come back, because this was fascinating stuff. There's a lot more I want to talk to you about. I think your work is really, really detailed and fantastic, and I think it's important to keep the focus on the right wing. I really do. Like the even not just talking about the JFK assassination, but and I'm not talking about just somebody who middle to the right. I'm talking about the extreme right wing. I think it's important because that threat is always looming from the extreme right. And I think it's very important to understand that, not just when you're talking about JFK, but just as we sit here today, that threat from the right. So I think that's why it's important. Is there anything that we missed that you want to talk about real quick that we didn't cover? I think we hit on a lot of good points, but I know there's a lot more.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for your time. I'll just to add what you were just saying there at the end, if we were more honest about what had happened in the 1960s, because there was 63, but there was 68, and those were not, as you know, they were not separated. I mean, it was all a linear thing, right? If we were honest about it, if Hoover was maybe honest about it, if everyone was honest about it, maybe we wouldn't be in the place we are today, obviously, but specifically with the right wing. I will say, I'm sorry, but January 6th we didn't even get into the idea of the white supremacist religion that kind of coded the mentality of these guys, which was basically that anything other than the white race is an inferior race. And so we are, as Delphine Roberts said once, we are the privileged white race of Jesus. And so that idea is really driving a lot of ideology today that's up to and including, unfortunately, this administration.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. You nailed it.
100%.
And that could be an episode where you just talk about that. Could be a whole episode right there, Jay.
Yeah, for sure.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. I agree. But this was fantastic. We'll definitely know if you want to come back, James. We'll have to have you back.
Absolutely.
A lot more to talk about.
I'm honored, guys. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right.
All right, Sean, this was a great episode, and we appreciate you, James. Thank you very much again for coming on. And all right, that's enough.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.